Thank you, Chris. I'm on that.
Oh.
Can't give into it.
Oh, okay. No, it's a city meeting that I want to listen to while I'm working on. No, that's the one we just on the crate. It was the.
But this is
Oh.
three,
Yeah.
and they're two separate people.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what, cool, I handed you those, but yeah, that part. I'll give you one back. There's six in the crate. There must be another deeper.
I'm not
Sorry, there's PO.
Yeah, no, there is no steel.
So this.
Who's ever got their on needs to mute.
Oh,
Yeah.
You need to mute.
So,
You're not on, Mark.
oh, okay.
Especially when they film me, that's like.
Well, at least he can get going on.
I'm going to call the
right.
Board of Alderman special virtual meeting to order. Would you please rise and join me in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Okay, I'm going to call the roll, and we'll get started. John English. Present. Eric McPherson. Present. Chris Delmese. Here.
Bernie Simons.
Joined the meeting.
David Gidwani.
Present.
Joanna Carloni.
Present.
Noreen McGordy.
She's a no. I'm here.
Anthony Simonetti. Present. Bernie Simons.
Present.
Okay. We'll go right to the public portion. Is there anyone from the public who would like to address the board? If you do, please state your name and address for the record. Anyone wishing to address the board? Hearing none, we're going to go to a presentation that we have from the Executive Director of the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities on the zoning reform in Connecticut for suburban and rural communities to allow multifamily housing as a matter of right. So with that, I'll ask Mr. DeLong to come to the podium and Joe, take care. That's it.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to start off by just thanking the Board of Alders and the Mayor for having me here this evening. I'll get very quickly to the agenda and move along. I did want to let you know that when I came to Connecticut 6 years ago, one of the very first meetings that I had was with Mayor Loretti. I had been here about 3 weeks, maybe not even quite that long, and I came here to City Hall to meet with the Mayor. And Kevin Maloney, who's with me today, told me on the way, he said, "Now, I want to warn you, the Mayor's going to be tough." I said, "Well, that's okay. You know, I look forward to that." And I came in, I introduced myself, and the first thing he said to me right off the bat was, "I'm not even sure what it is that CCM does." And I looked at him, I said, "Mayor, I've only been here for 3 weeks, so I'm not sure what they do either." We've got along, I think, just fine since then. And you know, again, really appreciate the opportunity to be with you. What I'm going to do quickly, first I want to introduce one of my advocacy managers who's really been on the front lines of this issue for the past couple of years, Donna Hamzy-Carocha. And as we get into technical questions, I'm going to ask Donna to help answer those because Donna's the one who's been doing a great deal of work with all parties involved on this issue. But what I want to do very briefly is kind of talk to you about the history of this issue and how CCM has developed positions, a little bit about how our process works. Dating back, at least on these particular bills, back in the last spring, received a phone call from Sarah Bronin, who is the head of Desegregate CT. And Sarah Bronin asked me the question of, would you guys be willing to work with us and willing to join our coalition to discuss these issues? And my comment to Sarah was, absolutely. As an organization, we're willing to join any coalition to discuss any issue. It doesn't mean we'll be supportive of it, but we absolutely like to have the opportunity to come to the table and work with various groups on things that impact our communities. So following that meeting, we held a meeting with CCM's executive committee on our board of directors. Invited Sarah to that. Sarah had a conversation with them about what she was working on and some of her proposals. They had a lot of questions. There were things in the proposals at that time that the executive committee was not supportive of. They made that very clear. But they did indicate to Sarah at that time that, yes, that CCM would certainly be willing to be a partner in working together on these issues, and appreciated the opportunity to work with them instead of just having to respond to legislation many times that is well-intended and very poorly written or thought out, and that puts us in precarious positions at the General Assembly. So I wanted to read just what Donna brought up to me. For the last several months, CCM has had a working group of our members that have been working on a regular basis to improve the desegregation.
Charles Kelly.
Join the meeting.
And to give you an idea of the communities involved in that working group, I'm just going to read them off real quick. So they were Park Hempstead, Bethany, Bolton, Bridgeport, Clinton, Columbia, and East Windsor, Greenwich, Guilford, Hampton, Hartford, Killingly, Mansfield, New Haven, Newington, Reading, Stamford, Stratford, Thomaston, Union, Warren, Westport. That working group literally went through each individual proposal. There were meetings that we had where we spent 2 hours on a meeting talking about one segment of the desegregate CT proposals. And they made their modifications that they thought were appropriate. They talked about how they would impact their individual communities. And ultimately, the individual segments of the desegregate CT proposal were voted
John
on.
Fitzgerald.
Join the meeting.
One segment at a time. And through that working group, there was not a single dissenting vote that was cast on any one of these individual proposals after they had modified them or made the recommendation to how they thought that they should be done. So following the working group getting through all of those individual proposals in a way in which they could be supportive of them, the working group's product went to CCM's board of directors, which currently has representatives on it from 30 communities. And it was presented to the board of directors as a package, with the understanding that this package had been worked on with the working group of CCM's members, and the board of directors was asked to take a position on it. Again, there were no dissenting votes from the board of directors as they looked through the package as recommended. There were 2 members of the board of directors that abstained from casting a vote. So the positions at that point, I think, at least from the perspective of staff, had gone through a pretty extensive process and were pretty heavily vetted by the membership. Now, one of the challenges that we find with these types of positions are there's many bills that are out there that often create a lot of confusion. There are bills that we don't support because we haven't been part of being able to work with organizations to develop them and vet them and that sort of thing. So ultimately, you have a bill that's going to be up on Monday, which is Senate Bill 1024. Senate Bill 1024 is essentially the modified version of the original desegregate CP agenda as modified by the working group of CCM's membership and CCM's board. So, that's one of the proposals. There'll be several other proposals that we will, both in P&D as well as in the Housing Committee, that we will oppose. But that's a proposal that went through a pretty extensive vetting process. The other thing I just want to point out is we did a quick cursory look, knowing that we were going to be here tonight, on those proposals in Senate Bill 1024, and Shelton's already doing all of them. So I don't believe that there's anything in that specific proposal that, if enacted, will have any impact on your community at all, because frankly, you're pretty much ahead of the curve on this issue as it comes to your affordable housing and your local zoning ordinances. So that was one thing that we thought was important to at least come with tonight, was making sure that there wasn't anything this vetted bill that was going to impact your community, and as of right now, it looks like it would not have any impact, at least currently, the way that you're conducting your planning. I think that from my perspective, pretty much covers at least letting you know what the process is, and I thought that was important because I get asked the question a lot, not just on this bill, but a lot of bills. Why did CCM take this position? Asked by our own membership. Why did CCM take this position? And I always give the same answer. I always say it's because the members told us to. We don't develop these positions as a staff. There's a process, a very extensive process is put in place, and then we go and carry out, the will of the members as it is presented to us. So, Mayor, if I may, I could ask the Board of Aldermen yourself, if you would like, Donna could go over the provisions that committee has adopted, accepted, or we can just pause and take any questions that you have with any of those provisions. I certainly don't want to waste your time, but want to respond to every.
No, I think we'd like to hear from Donna,
Yeah, that'd be great.
and then we can go into questions.
Thank you, Joe. So I just wanted to build a little bit off of what Joe was saying related to the proposal and the work of Desegregate CT along with CCM and its membership over the many months that we've been working with them. That this doesn't also stop here. This is just the bill that came out of those discussions, and I think the best part of the legislative process is that this is the first part of that process, and so there's an opportunity for us to all come together and really lend our voices and hopefully work in a collaborative way to make this work for everyone. So the consensus items that we've put out based on the working group's work, I think you have them before you, so I'm just going to kind of go through them. They're not in any particular order. Related to commercial corridors and Main Street corridors, the original proposal that Desegregate CT put out had just the reference to a commercial corridor. And in some cases, particularly in the case of a lot of the small towns that were involved, there weren't any commercial corridors that they could really name or call out. It didn't apply to them. And so they really thought that it made more sense and it was more representative of communities across the state that they used the word Main Street corridor. And that would help to alleviate whether or not if they had TOD or if there was just no TOD, but instead, no transit, but instead just a Main Street corridor that this would actually apply to. The second piece was the original draft had included a cap of $250 on consulting fees. So when a developer comes to and you want to go out, as you all know, the process, you want to go out and seek consultation on any part of that proposal, this would have capped it at $250. And so this was generally consensus around the table, not only with small towns, but also mid-sized cities who may have the staff, but they don't have the technical expertise in the environmental area, for example, to really fully vet a proposal. And so we really came forward and asked that those caps be removed, and that the consensus or compromise was really adding the word necessary, which essentially just makes it narrow in terms of whatever consulting fees are necessary for that particular project. And that really gives you all, as the town, sort of some flexibility as to what necessary is. It's not fully defined by the bill. The removal of the word character. So this has been something that people have been conversating about a lot. The word character brings a lot of conversation. I know it's just a word, and that was really the beginning part of our conversation around that particular word, is that it is really just a word, but for some people it really is a word that carries a lot of historically racially segregating context. And so whether to agree with that or not, it was the will of the group and the consensus around the table that folks do feel that way, and they feel very strongly in that way. And so how can we get to a place where we can still identify or at least provide towns the ability to maintain character, so to speak, but not say it in such a way. And so there was agreement that the words physical site characteristics and architectural context be used in its place. That just still allows you all to ensure that there's aesthetic conformity and that you can preserve any historical characteristics, but just doesn't use the word character specifically as just the word. Traffic standard changes. So within the bill, there was some conversation that Desegregate Connecticut had about providing options to towns who, traditionally, the option is level service. That's how you decide what the traffic impact is going to be in a particular development. This proposal is offering the option of using the vehicle miles traveled or vehicle trips generated rationale. And the reason behind that is really that a lot of the developments that use the level service or level traffic service impacted by the development tend to create road expansion and sprawl. And so the hope was, through offering this option, that there would be towns who might use vehicle miles traveled to provide for mitigating options. So mitigating strategies involve like adding bikeways or walkways or crosswalks. And so giving towns the ability to use that standard with the option to require the developer to provide options for crosswalks, bike walks, and bus stops, et cetera. That, again, is not mandated by the bill, but it just provides an option to towns. If they want to use level service, they may still use that. Because really, it couldn't necessarily be a mandate because DOT still uses the level of service standard. Minimum parking standards. So this particular part of the bill applies a minimum parking standard not to exceed a standard. And this part of the bill applies to all parking within the community. And there's specific language in the bill that's related to just the TOD section of the bill that requires, as of right, types of housing within a transit district or miles of transit district. Within that particular portion of the bill, there are no parking requirements. So to back up, related to the parking requirements, it was agreed that while the bill initially allowed for a minimum parking standard, that the will of the group was that we should also set a ceiling for that. And so they decided that there was a minimum standard with a maximum allowable parking for dwelling units and multifamily and mixed-use developments that may not exceed parking in excess of 1 parking space for each studio or 1-bedroom dwelling unit, and 2 parking spaces for each dwelling unit with 2 or more bedrooms. And again, related to the TOD portions of the bill, there is no parking requirement that applies. The regulation of signs. So this particular piece of the bill was not discussed in our working group, but it is one that came out of our policy committee related to law and liability. And essentially, it's just removing the word advertising from the zoning statutes, because there was a court decision that allowed zoning commissions to regulate advertising signs with no other types of signs included. And so towns really felt that, we really need an option to regulate all signs, not necessarily the contents of the signs, but regulating the signs in general. And so by removing the word advertising, municipal attorneys said that that is a quick solution to allow for towns to be able to regulate all signs, again, not the content of those signs, but without having to worry about just advertising signs being required by the statute. The bill also allows for an aggrieved party to bring suit against a municipality they feel is not following the zoning laws of the state. So essentially, that particular conversation started off by the language in the bill saying any person, and so there was a lot of conversation around the fact that not any person can bring a suit, because not any person is or holds standing in the court for that particular suit. So by using the word aggrieved party, it was agreed that that actually provides legal ease, I guess, to the lawyers in the room, but that provides the point that they have standing within the court for that particular suit. Accessory dwelling units. So the working group agreed that essentially, because it really is something that towns are doing now, to allow for as of right accessory dwelling units, for at least one, I should say, accessory dwelling unit on each single family lot. And then transit-oriented development, and this is sort of what Joe was talking about, and I'm going to actually talk about this in terms of Shelton and how you guys are doing in this area with TOD, which I think is an important distinction, or at least point to make, because I think this is kind of where some of the conflicts come up or arise, or I think maybe the concerns. So in the bill, they're proposing that 50% of an area within a quarter mile of one Main Street they're proposing that for 2 to 4 unit housing, with any housing over 10 units being 10% of the units as affordable. So essentially what they're saying is that, sorry, I'm just going to go back to my testimony so that I have it in front of me. So essentially, it's saying that 4 or more units to 50% of the lot area in a half-mile fixed transit district. So you all don't have a fixed transit district as defined in this bill. And so this particular piece of it will not apply to you. The second portion relates to the same calculation off of a main street or a main street corridor. And so you all already provide for multifamily housing within that space. So I'm just going to read what I prepared for you related to Shelton. So you all already provide accessory dwelling units as of right, just to backtrack. And then you do not have a transit station, as I mentioned, so that part of this proposal does not apply to you. And then related to 50% of the area around a main street, so that requirement is 2 to 4 units of housing, you already limit 2 to 4 unit housing as of right near central commercial corridors, and in general limit 2 to 4 unit housing as of right in your community. So really that piece of the proposal is only specifically related to TOD development, and in this particular case, you are already allowing that 2 to 4 unit housing across your community. And then I'll just go back, and this final, finish up on what our consensus items were. And so then just in general, there were some outstanding items that we knew we had to kind of work through with the legislature in terms of verbiage and the LCO. And so specifically related to the working group that's created under the bill, the working group is created through DOH, and it's meant to create model design guidelines for buildings and context-appropriate streets. And our request was, currently the bill names DCM as the municipal representative, and we just felt that that was just not representative enough of municipalities across the state. And so we're recommending that they give at least 3 levels, so small town, mid-sized city, and a large city. And then there's a requirement in the bill, and there's actually other bills related to this, that requires land planning and zoning commissioners. And while the technical pieces of that have not been laid out, and there's been organizations like ours called out in the bill to help formulate this curriculum with OPM, the concerns we're raising related to this are really for the smaller towns who are already having trouble finding volunteers that sit on these commissions. And so by adding a mandate to require training for these commissioners and putting the onus on those commissioners as volunteers, the fear is that they won't have volunteers for these commissions.
Yeah, so let me stop you there and ask the question. Who's paying for the training and who's doing the training?
Thank you for that question. And I think that that's still one of those those items that's sort of hanging out there. And, you know, as CCM and other organizations that are named in the bill, we already provide training. And so the organizations like CASIO, the Connecticut Association of Zoning Enforcement Officers, or CCAPA, the Connecticut Association of Planners, I don't know if that's the actual acronym, but they're already providing this training. They already have this curriculum, and so there's really not a lot of work that needs to go into putting that together. It's just taking pieces from everyone. Providing the training, you know, we've had conversations internally with our member services to be able to provide that training to our membership and as an extension to your commission. That's still a work in progress, so I don't want to promise anything. But to answer your question, I think if the bill was to move through the process, there will be a fiscal note for this reason. But we are working behind the scenes to hopefully alleviate that fiscal note. I hope that answered your question. And then the last piece of this is really related to sewer and water infrastructure. As you all know, in Connecticut, a lot of communities do not have sewer or water infrastructure to support development. And so that is really a lot of the reason why some of these communities have just not built out. And so our hope, and has been for quite some time, is that the state recognizes that we want to use alternative waste treatment systems and also emboldening DPH in statutes that already exist to create regulations around the use of these types of structures or infrastructure, so that when developers come and they want to deal with each town, that they're dealing with each town based on a set of regulations that DPH has created, and it's easier across town lines to understand what the requirements will be. And so I think that is really the hope that we have, that DPH will be at least given some funding to be able to create regulations that they were required to create, I think, years ago in statute. So I'll stop there. That's all we have related to the consensus items. And I don't know if I'll turn it over to Justin Joe, or if you guys have any questions.
Okay, does anybody have any questions? I know that, we have our planning and zoning administrator here tonight, and our chairman of our planning and zoning commission, Jeannie Harger, have a great interest in this, interpretation of possible legislation that may come our way, so, I don't know, Alex, do you have any questions?
And bear with me, I am not as technically expert as you all have in planning, so if I can answer your question, I will, but if I'm not able to, I will definitely ask you. Okay. Do you want me to move?
Alex, just come to the microphone and state your name and address for the record, please.
Alex Izzetti, 2557 Burr Street, Fairfield, Connecticut. I just have one kind of comment and one question. So I'll start with the comment first. As I'm sure most of you in this room are aware, municipalities are required to have affordable housing plans by the end of this year. And it seems that the state is kind of jumping the gun by mandating all of these requirements without allowing towns to implement their own plans. Impacts of those plans come to fruition. So, I agree that many of these ideas could be beneficial, but I'm just kind of curious why this urge for statewide mandates for all of these different changes when municipalities haven't had time to address many of them. And I know Shelton, as you mentioned, is ahead of the curve in allowing accessory dwelling units and multifamily developments in some areas, but I think a lot of municipalities outside of Shelton would address these issues themselves without the state pushing this. So I'm just throwing that out there as an idea of why is this happening without giving towns the time to address these issues themselves. And the second question I have is, it seems like this is not the case, but a number of constituents and people that I've spoken with throughout our public are worried about multifamily developments in typical 1-acre zoning outside of transit hubs and outside of Main Street areas. And I was hoping you could just clarify for the record that these bills are not intended to allow multifamily developments outside into these, kind of much more suburban 1-acre zoning areas. They're intended for kind of more downtown Main Street transit areas. Just to clarify so that everyone's kind of on the same page.
Thank you. For the record, it's Joe DeLong again, and I'll defer to Donna at some point on the more technical question, but I did want to address the second question, the way it was phrased as these bills. We're speaking specifically to a bill. There are several bills out there, many of which again, we would have tremendous reservations about for a variety of reasons. So I would suspect that there probably are bills introduced that would address that fear or that concern. I'll let Donna speak to the specific bill and how, the segregate CT proposals and how they would apply. As to the first question of the why, to be honest, that's a question that we could ask over a whole lot of things that the General Assembly decides to do or advocates decide to tackle. Our position as the organization, I think it really comes back, I'll be honest, it goes all the way back to 6 years ago when I was interviewing, was hired for this job. One of the things that I asked the board at that time was, what is it that you want? What do you want as a new successful executive director? And one of the things they said is we really want to be partners in governing. We want to be at the table as opposed to being on the menu all the time. So, we've worked in that regard to say that anybody who wants to work with us, we will try to, what doesn't mean we'll agree with what you have to say, but we will try as an organization representing our members, with our members at the table to work collaboratively with you. We'll come with an open mind and an open agenda to try to work through things. And so I haven't really questioned why. I would say that, first off, I would say that some of these proposals, a variety of these proposals have been around for years. I think that somewhat the national stage of highlighting equity has driven them more to the forefront. I would argue, perhaps unsuccessfully, and CCM has done a lot of work in the area of equity. I would argue that these bills, none of them really have anything to do with equity. At least, some may, but at least the ones that we've been engaged and been working on in the housing area, they're not as much about equity as they are, at least about race equity, as they are about economics, frankly. So I think that's one of the issues is sometimes how things are framed and how they're named, that these bills are about desegregation, and that has an idea that perhaps that desegregation is some type of race equity issue. I don't really think that they do anything to address race equity. But, you know, I know it's a roundabout answer. I'm not answering your question other than to say, you know, we don't always know why. We don't always know why the General Assembly takes on what it takes on, or you know, makes a priority. What is a priority? I've been screaming on the mountaintops for 6 years saying that the only priority the General Assembly should be focusing on is our $60 billion unfunded pension and OPEB liabilities. But that doesn't seem to be a priority with our administration and our elected officials right now. Issues like this are. And so I think as long as they are a priority for some, we have to make sure that we are at the table and working with people to try to make sure that if something passes, that it passes with the best interests of our members and our community at heart, not just the sake of getting something passed so a box can be checked. So, Donna, do you want to talk more specifically about the segregated proposals and how they address this issue?
Okay, thank you for the question. This is Donna Hamsey-Croce again for the record. So specifically related to your first question with regard to the affordable housing plan, I think folks see this as two different things. This particular bill, while a lot of, I think, the terms related to the housing types that are required by this bill, or at least referred to in this bill, multifamily, and multi-mixed use, et cetera, I think they're not really talking about affordability in this bill. We're not really talking about making these units affordable. The only, I think, time when affordability is raised or a question of affordability is raised is when the units in a development are I think over 10 units, I can't remember, or over 100 units, it might be, I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head. But just specifically related to that, I think, again, this is two different things. Again, to Joe's point, I don't know why, I can't really give you an exact reason, but if I was to guess, I think in this case, because we're not talking about affordable housing, instead diversity of housing stock, that's why distinction. But remind me of your second question. I apologize if that's your wrong something.
You have multifamily outside of DOD and getting into the one
So
area.
yeah, for the record, now I remember. So for the record, yes, this is not related to multifamily housing as described in the bill, or mixed-use housing under the North Cottage clusters, for example. None of that is referred to anywhere else outside of the TOD zone. So that is under the bill. The requirements are just specifically in that area of TOD.
Thank you very much for being here this evening. My question is, who is behind this bill? What senators, what representatives? Do you know who it is?
So of course, the Desegregate CT, they've done a lot of work behind the scenes, to their credit, really, with a lot of different organizations. I would say there's not one particular legislator that's really the champion at this point. I think it's really just a collection of them. But it's really more of a collection of organizations that have now signed on to the Desegregate Connecticut organization.
Yeah, it seems that Hartford and New Haven are in the lead on this.
They're absolutely a part of the conversation, but I don't think that they're the only.
No, they're not the only ones, but they're the aggressors.
If I may follow up, this is S-1024, Senate 1024. And you said that the Shelton Board of the Shelton P&Z and the P&Z administration are ahead of this at this time. You don't see any real problem for us with this particular bill. And I'm going to ask the staff and the administrators that are here if they agree. But what bill do you think might be a problem that was just brought up by, our administrator, that would affect 1 acre zoning problem in the area?
So, just because I don't have them in front of me, but just thinking off the top of my head, there are a number of bills, but I, again, can't think of them now, but I think one of the specific ones that you might be, or have heard of is Senate Bill 804. That particular bill is before the Housing Committee. Senator Anwar from South Windsor is really the champion in that bill, and, what a lot of the different advocates, is take pieces of the desegregate proposal and inserted them into proposals that go farther, because there's a lot of, again, I think to the credit of desegregate CTs, they really come to CCM and municipalities to work with us, whereas other organizations and legislators really haven't done that. And so they're just taking pieces of that proposal and putting it into a proposal that they think that they want to go farther than what is the desegregate CT proposal. And those proposals we do not agree with because there was no consensus among our membership on.
If I could now ask our zoning administrator and our zoning, chair, do you agree with her that S1024 is not a problem, or are there problems with it? And if so, what can we do about it?
Again, Alex Rossetti, planning and zoning admin. Alderman Severity, that we just kind of started reading through this tonight. I don't want to speak officially, but based off of what, CCM, the representatives have said, what I've skimmed through, it does not seem to pose any challenges to our city. Most of the things that, as she's mentioned, that this bill proposes are things that we already have in our regulations, that we already have in our ordinances, that we already do, constantly. So I think, based off of what we've heard tonight, I think this is a bill we can be pretty safe with. But as to the other bills, I definitely think we should have a review.
The only caution that I would raise in that is that oftentimes the legislature, in their infinite wisdom, attach values and numbers associated with these regulations that is very difficult, if impossible, for many municipalities around the state of Connecticut to meet. And we may fall victim to that as well.
And I would just kind of make one comment, just for everyone in the room. To say, I think many of us have an understanding that there is a housing shortage in the state, that we are losing, our population year by year due to high housing costs, a plethora of issues. And some of these housing proposals may help change that, may help keep our youth and our educated that are kind of moving out of the state. But to say that the segregate CT is not at all related to affordable housing, I don't think that's quite fair. I understand they have different intentions, but, I know Shelton's a different town than some of these other towns, but my assumption would be, let's say somewhere like Reading or Easton that doesn't have as much commercial development, they might be inclined to come up with a downtown area or a commercial area that's going to allow for higher density development. And with their affordable housing plan, they're going to allow for these higher density developments. So, again, just kind of going back to what I said earlier, these are just my comments. I don't want to speak for the rest of the administration, but it just seems like they're jumping the gun by mandating all of these things for towns that haven't had the chance to potentially allow for themselves to come up with areas of where they want to have these higher density developments, and maybe they are outside of transit districts, maybe they want to relocate things. I know it doesn't apply for Shelton, but just some food for thought as you discuss this bill. I would let municipalities be creative, work with their commissions, work with their citizens and their staff to figure out ways to address these issues that, then the state doesn't have to deal with. But that's just my 2 cents. Any questions from the Alderman?
Hi, I'm Jimmy Harger, I'm the chairperson of planning and zoning. I'd like, just, confirmation as to who on CC and staff was it the group that went through all the proposed bills just to get a, impact.
So that's, we didn't go through, I just want to be clear that we went through the 1024 bill, we haven't gone through as a working group, all of the mentions that were raised outside of that.
Okay. And I did testify, put in the public hearing for 804, and I signed up to testify for Monday before, planning and development. So, there just seems to be a lot there that sometimes you cannot tell by looking at the bill to what the content of the bill is. I had specifically mentioned in my second, testimony in a public hearing that I don't see that transparency at all. That should be there. I'll hold judgment on exactly what the impact would be on some of these, because while it seems at first glance it may not, it can't, because there's always something that falls through the cracks, and then all of a sudden it comes back later on and say, oh, I didn't know that that's what happened. So I wouldn't sign off on this person myself or encourage the city to until we get a lot more information. One of the things that I noticed seems to be that the language may appear more than one bill. They might be the case, but I'm looking at several attention benefits today that have to do with Monday public hearing, and I look at the word, and it just needs some stuff that kind of language that may be necessary, but I would hope that we're not to try where, well, if we can't get this concept passed in this bill, it'll be in this one and it'll go by. So that's a couple concerns I have for sure. And then specifically, you had mentioned about the sewer and water infrastructure, and these regulations that have to be followed. Have the local water pollution control authority been informed of this, and have they had a chance to share their input on that particular state of that particular bill?
Yeah, I haven't heard from any water control members, but it's really run by them. It's been relations to sewer and water infrastructure. They're always going to push to increase the jurisdiction that DPH has over that. So that's always been our hope that at least moving some of that.
Yeah, it just would make me sense that if you have a local board that have abide by some regulations, that you sure better have a chance to comment on it before you go in. So, thank you.
Mayor, if I could just respond real quickly, I want to make, because I think those are excellent points. And so I want to make a point that I think from our perspective, somewhat as a an advocacy group, or at least an advocacy arm within our group that's important, is giving our advocacy staff some direction from the membership as to what they can support. I think that's important, because if you go into the General Assembly session and every single piece of legislation that deals with zoning or housing or anything like that, if your initial reaction to all of it is no, without showing a willingness to come to the table or to work with proponents who are willing to work with you, what ends up happening is you just get shut out of the room, and then they end up doing some really bad and sometimes really dumb things. So the proposals, as Donna went through, again, I think were crafted by the working group and adopted by the board as a set of guidelines for our advocacy, saying, if they want us at the table to do some things, here's some things that make sense. And if they start getting outside of the scope of things that make sense, then it becomes much easier to say, no, we're not going to allow that, we're going to push back against against that, and it's not because we're opposed to everything. It's not because we're not willing to work for you. It's because this stuff hasn't been vetted. It's been interesting to me how some other groups in the housing world, I think on the agenda, one of the things said CCM's relationship with the Segregate Connecticut and Open Communities Alliance. Well, I can tell you that there's no relationship with Open Communities Alliance. There are some people since then, since the start of the session from there, who have reached out and said, hey, we want to work with you too. I said, well, that's great, but you have to work with our membership, and it's a process, and it's not something that can be done at the last minute. These conversations with the Segregate CT have gone on for months, and sometimes we're a little difficult, sometimes we're a little contentious, but at least they were well vetted, and their proposals changed because of the direction of our membership. So it's interesting how some other advocates sometimes wait till session comes and they have a bill that they've come up with on their own, and then they try to come to us and say, hey, we really want to work with you. And not really, because if you want to work with us, you've been working with us back in June and July and August and September, and when the real work gets done. And so, I wanted to answer that bullet point that our relationship with the Segregate CT is the same as our relationship is with CBIA or AFL-CIO or any other group out there that wants to come to the table or wants us to bring our members to the table to work collaboratively on something. We're always going to do that, no matter who it is. Doesn't mean that we'll come to a solution, doesn't mean we'll come to an agreement, but we think that we're all better off if we do that, if we work together on these things. And I think one of the best examples of that was, when I got here again 6 years ago, for the first 4 years that I was here, year after year after year, we killed some really dumb mental stress PTSD bills that were proposed for police and firefighters every single year. And every year I said the same thing. We're not against doing this, but it has to be done right. It can't be loaded with unintended consequences. It can't open the door to a ton of fraud. And year after year, those groups didn't want to work with us. They just looked at us as the enemy. And then finally, one day they came to us and said, hey, we're ready. Will you really work with us? And we put together, Mayor O'Leary up in Waterbury put together the working group that met sometimes 2 or 3 times a month and pounded out a solution that finally passed a couple of years ago with our support. And it hasn't hurt Townsend City. It hasn't raised costs. It has helped the people who needed the help, but it hasn't opened the door to fraud. And so that's how we hope that this process and other processes continue to work. That there's a set of guidelines established by our membership that we can show that we're willing to be at the table, we're willing to work toward meaningful solutions, but we're also going to have very fierce advocacy against things that you try to just run over us with or run by us with. And so it is a balancing process, but I think we have a very good, very, very good, it's not me, very good advocacy team at that Capitol. Donna is excellent. She has a few other colleagues on that team that are all excellent, and I can tell you that they are, anytime you have any questions, concerns, or hearing rumors, just pick up the phone and call us, because, again, we're here to work for you.
Okay, John, you have some questions?
Yeah, I just want to make a few comments. I'm not sure, after picking up the phone and calling you, getting you to come out here today, I'm not sure that I'm any farther along, except that more people are involved and we've heard a few things and we maybe understand a few things that we didn't. But the way this came to me, I read the New York Times article, not very complimentary. We're working with Desegregate Connecticut, who appears to be working with us, but on the other hand, they're going off and striking off on their own, and they're picking on one of our members, Woodbridge, and they're taking an action, and you're getting the Yale Law School involved, and I just don't see that from a third party sitting here as a member saying, hey, I don't think they're working with us, I think they're using us. And I'm not sure which is the case. But,
John, Oliver, if I could respond to that real quickly, I just want to be clear, because I think it's a very valid point. That's actually not the Segregate CT that's going after Woodbridge. It's the Open Communities Alliance. They're 2 totally separate groups, and we don't have that working relationship with the Open Communities Alliance.
of the things that CCM has done very well is communicate. And this issue was not communicated well. I mean, it was just not communicated well. I gave Kevin some of, you guys put out beautiful communications. You've done a wonderful job over the years. And I just think we got to improve our communication. You might think that Shelton is doing fine, but Shelton might be head and shoulders above others, and we might have some opportunities, but we've got some issues to communicate as well, and things that should be put on the table when the powers to be in Hartford are determined in changing laws and giving us how we're going to be governed. There's some things that our planning and zoning people will tell you that might open their eyes a little bit. So I think the communication has got to get better if we're going to have an impact. And, you know, just to go a step back, you noted that there was a working group. I have no idea how that working group was formed. I don't believe we were contacted and asked if we had an interest in it.
Yeah, I can't necessarily speak to that directly. I think what we did, but, you know, obviously, as you said, communication can always be better, and we'll work on that. What we did initially, we did send out kind of a bolo across the board to the membership, saying that we were forming this group and asking anybody who would be interested in serving on it. And then as time went by, there were other communities that reached out and said, hey, I heard this is going on and I have a concern. And our response was, well, just come and join the group. But I think your point is a good one, and one that we need to take to heart, that the communication can be better, and we'll certainly take that back and work on that to make sure that those things don't slip through.
I think we've got 169 towns, and I just sit here wondering how many are really aware of what's really going on and how this is going to impact them. And I think this is a serious impact that impacts not only the town, but every individual who's invested his life savings in his property. And the challenge coming from Hartford is, we're going to tell you how to legislate for the entire state, all 169 municipalities. And that's just gross.
Alderman, let me say this, you're saying that's music to my ears, because our job, the more member engagement we have, the easier our job is. So, we would certainly, love to have a greater engagement on these. You know, I could send you a list of not just the Desegregate CT committee, but all of the policy committees of the membership within CCM. And if there are people from your boards or commissions or on the Board of Alders or others that would like to join or have a particular interest in any of those areas, you have my word, we'll make that happen. We'll make you a part of it. I would love to have you as a part of it, certainly.
Okay. Mr. DeLong, again, thank you for coming. Couple things. One is, I'd rather see capitalism move things forward as far as zoning, planning and zoning goes. Okay. Number two is, I think it's a slippery slope that we go down. The mayor brought it up about the legislative bodies, not just here, but in other areas, that they start with one thing, and then near the end of the session, they tack things onto it, nobody sees it, and we're stuck with a problem child as a legislation. Thirdly, I think that as our chairman or our president brought up, with 169 towns, you've got 30, I think, in your organization at this time. How many in CCM?
168.
Oh, you have them. Okay. For some reason I heard 30, and that threw me a curve.
That was the board of directors.
Oh, great.
Our board of directors represents across 30 communities.
Wonderful. I thought it was a great selling point to get people on board. Great. The other thing is, where did this start? What's the what group or what brought this up that it had to come to Shelton Woodbridge? What's the desegregation problem that they're more worried about than anything else that's bringing this about?
Yeah, again, I think some of these housing groups, various segments of them have been around, for years, or maybe a little more inspired now because of some current events, or, you know, the reality is that some of these things are also part of a more progressive agenda, and after the last election cycle, we have a more progressive General Assembly right now, so I think that they're feeling a little empowered, simply because of the results at the ballot box. What brought about our engagement, frankly, to be just perfectly direct, was just being asked. Normally, we go into session and we fight a ton of really dumb, bad proposals by groups who try to shield them from us and then sneak them by. And this one particular group, Desegregate CT, didn't do that. They reached out, you know, months in advance and said, hey, we're doing this, and we would love to have your input. Are you willing to bring people to the table? And so that's how the engagement, I think, started with them, is that they did what we wish more groups would do. And it's very hard, well, not hard, it's really impossible. As an organization, there's really no, the organization that we are, there's really no group out there that could ask us to come and meet with them that we could say no, or that we could say we don't believe in what you're doing, because we represent communities, and communities are diverse. And so we have to keep our door open to any group within any community that says we could talk to us. So that's kind of where things happen with desegregating. Like I said, a lot of these other groups haven't taken that same tack, and as a result, we'll be strongly opposing some of the things that they're trying to put forward. But, you know, I don't think this is anything new. I think what is new is that you have a newly group that formed that came to us and wanted to hear municipal input before they develop their proposals, or as they develop their proposals, which, you know, again, like I said, I give them a lot of credit for that. We appreciate that. Even if we don't agree on everything, I think that even the Desegregate CT agenda in this final bill is a much better bill because they got so much municipal input in drafting it as opposed to what it would have been otherwise.
And lastly, if I may, are any of your staff working on S-804, which might be a problem for us?
Yeah, we track every single one of these bills and advocate and lobby and testify to all of them. And yes, 804 is a bill that we are in opposition to.
Okay.
And can you add and catalog any of the other pending bills that would impact our city related to this?
Related to zoning or housing? Yeah, we could send you a list, absolutely. That'd be easy to do.
And I would just say that every year there is a variety of those types of bills from our illustrious elite in Hartford. Okay, Joe and Donna, thank you very much. Kevin, nice to see you.
Thank you.
Appreciate your input here. We'll keep the dialogue.
Appreciate the input. Thank you.
Nicely done.
Okay, we'll move on to the minutes for approval. Item 1.1, special virtual meeting of February 23rd, 2021.
Move to waive the reading and approve the following meeting minutes. The special virtual meeting of February 23rd, 2021. So moved.
Second.
Motion is made by Englace and seconded by Simonet. Is there any discussion? Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Are there any opposed? Are there any opposed? Hearing none opposed, the motion carries. Takes us to item 5.1, Finance Committee. There are no items. Item 5.2, Public Health and Safety Committee. There are no items. Item 5.3, the Street Committee. There are no items. Takes us to next is the report of the mayor, and the first time in a very long time that I do want to share with the board some of my thoughts on a letter to the editor by one of our very own, the great Gidwani, from the First Ward. Sent a letter to the editor saying that the city deserves better than Loretti. And, you know, over my 30 years, I've always appreciated my critics, or not so much, only because I know that most of their dialogue and commentary becomes personal. It's very, very rarely rooted in fact, as is the case they Mr. Gawani starts out and says that, apparently, the system is irrevocably broken. Irrevocably broken. I thought to myself, well, how does he qualify this? You know, considering the fact that, we didn't go through this last year. And he references the fact that kids are not being picked up by the school buses because, we're not managing properly. And I thought to myself again, okay, where was this commentary last year when the city took over the buses? Virtually non-existent. And so, you know, if you look around the state, the country, and the world, the last year, it's not hard to know that there are many things that have been disrupted in our lives. Government, school, recreation, transportation at every level. No one should be surprised at that, except Mr. Gawani thinks it's singular here to Shelton. And so, I did some research and got some numbers from the Board of Education, and let me qualify this. These are the, total school runs needed and provided in the morning and in the afternoon. And this is for the month of February. There were 545 runs that we made, 10 of which we missed. 10 out of 545 for the month of February. If you go to March, there were 396 runs, and 8 of which were missed. So that means that the kids didn't get transported by the buses because there was a lack of availability for buses. And it has nothing to do with the resources that we have to provide the service, but it has to do everything with the fact that there's a pandemic and that people are sick, people are staying home, they're calling in sick. Last Monday, we had 17 drivers that called in sick. So we were unavailable to provide 2 runs, I think it was, that day. Started out as 4, but we scrambled and put together private contractors and took some of our other personnel at the bus depot to fulfill the runs. And, you know, if timing was an issue, then so be it. But it was not for a lack of effort. And so all of this week, we've been down 12 to 13 drivers because, as we know, when you get COVID-19, you're required to quarantine for X number of days under the CDC guidelines. And so, you know, that hampers things. And so, as I said to you earlier before, this is not an issue that is singular to Shelton. Last couple of months, the city of Waterbury had 30 drivers that called in sick and had to cancel bus runs. Last November, the city of New Haven had to cancel school for a month and a half for lack of bus drivers because bus drivers called in sick. And so, you know, the list goes on and on and on. You know, we see that in Stratford and Trumbull and Monroe, surrounding communities. Again, not singular to Shelton, but, you know, in this political environment that we live in, people like to think that other people in the public are not smart and that they will buy into all of this rhetoric. And so, you know, going a little bit further, I want to talk about the fact that last year, sometime around November, school was shut down from November to January. No school at all. The reason being is that they couldn't staff the classrooms because teachers called in sick. And they couldn't get substitutes to fulfill the classrooms, empty classrooms. So is this singular to the school bus transportation in Shelton? I'll let you decide what you think it might be. You know, the other thing that we have been expeditiously working on with respect to school transportation is the automated system that is the responsibility of the Board of Education. It's called VersaTran. They have a system that does the routing and establishes all the routes with input from Board of Education staff at central office to give us the information where the kids live and establish the routes. Well, you know, not only has that not been updated in 10 years, but I'm also told that there is probably anywhere from 800 to 1,000 kids in the system that no longer exist. And so we are going to be working the next couple of weeks with VersaTran to update the automation on our buses. for our drivers, reestablishing new routes. Some of you may have heard me say over the last couple of months that our school enrollment is down 1,300 students since 2009. You know, that's not insignificant. If you look at the capacity of an elementary school, that's the equivalent of 3 elementary schools. Well, not only do we have the same number of elementary schools that we did in 1990 as we do today, but we also have the same school bus footprint as we did 15 years ago. That hasn't changed. So now I'm going to tell you that it is going to change. It's going to shrink that footprint. It's going to make us more efficient. And for all those people out there that deny the fact that we save $1 million a year by taking over the transportation for the school system, I would just call their attention to the court settlement and the fact that our guarantee price of $3,150,000 is $1.2 million less than what Durham had quoted the school system 2 years ago, and that they were all set to sign on to. And so that $1 million gets compounded for the next 2 years because we agreed to a 3-year contract with no increase. And so I think it's important for the public who still has an open mind to understand the facts surrounding some of this negative commentary that is coming from people who are disenfranchised with whatever it is that drives them. And so I'll stop there, and we'll move on with the agenda. You know, as a sidebar, you know, it was just Monday that CT Connecticut in New Haven had 50 bus drivers that called out and they had to cancel service. So I'm not sure if the city of Shelton's the only one that is being impacted by this worldwide pandemic.
That's a municipal service, not a municipal service. Connecticut Bus Company?
I think it's CT Transit does Bridgeport, New Haven, Hartford, you know, places like that. Okay, this takes us to the report of the president. Do you have anything?
That was very enlightening, may I add. Very enlightening. I have nothing to report.
Okay, item 6 is the legal report. Item 6.1 is Corporation Council billing.
Move to authorize a total payment of $2,537.50. The Corporation Council Theodosia Stanek LLC for services rendered per statement dated March 4th, 2021, with funds to come from the legal fees account. So moved.
Second.
Motion is made by Angles and seconded by McPherson. Is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Bernie Simons, are you in favor?
I said aye.
Okay, David Gidwani, are you still on the line?
It looks like he hung up.
Are you sure we didn't disconnect him? Because that's the first thing that we're gonna get from him.
Dan said he left. Okay. But I'll text him and see.
Okay, so, are there any opposed? Are there any opposed?
Should be.
Motion carries. That takes us to item 6.2, Assistant Corporation Council billing.
No invoice.
Okay, so we're gonna keep moving. Legislative old, there are no items. Financial business old, there are no items. Number 9 is financial business new, is March statutory refunds.
Move that the report of the tax collector relative to the refund of taxes for a total amount of $73,038.03 be approved, and that the finance director be directed to make payments in accordance with the certified list received from the tax collector, with funds to come from the statutory refunds account. So moved.
Second.
Motion is made by Angles and seconded by Simonetti.
An observation that's a significant jump. that, I guess the taxes were just the second half were just paid, so that's why we're getting these separate jumps.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Are there any opposed? Hearing none opposed, the motion carries. There are no items for legislative new. Takes us to item number 11, is executive session. 11.1 is Fisher versus the City of Shelton.
Your Honor, can I make a statement before you, go into session?
Sure.
I'd like to thank everybody from the, zoning administrators, the zoning, members who are here, for coming tonight, and the people from the, bus service for taking the time to be at the meeting tonight. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. A motion to go into executive session.
So moved.
Second.
And invite Corporation Counsel.
Second.
Motion was made by Anglais, seconded by Pearson. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.